Y'all want to know what I think is awesome? Amazing? DC, come on, give it up, everybody. Thank you all. I want to thank everybody from How for inviting me to be here. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you guys this morning. Thank you all. You guys want to know what else I think is amazing? Print. Man, print is a fantastic technology. I mean, you put the words on the paper and they stay there. I mean, you don't have to worry about keeping it updated all the time. Man, print is, I think, one of the greatest achievements that humankind has ever come up with. And when you think about how deeply rooted the practices of publishing in print are in human communication, how deeply the processes of communicating something on paper to convey hierarchy, priority, relationships, meaning, feeling, aesthetics, all of those things are derived from the hundreds of thousands of years of history we have in communicating in print. And then we had to go and invent the web. Which, I mean, on balance, I think it's been totally worth it. But man, is it a pain in the ass. So the web just turned 20, or maybe 25. Reasonable people differ about whether it started in 1989 or 1994, but whatever year the web actually got its start, I think it's clear that it's not very old. 20 or 25 years really isn't enough time for human beings to have wrapped their head around the way that the web is different. And so for the last 20 or 25 years or so, we've been kind of band-aiding ourselves along by pretending that the web is, well, it's really just kind of like a piece of paper, right? I mean, a web page is essentially not all that different from the printed page. And so most of the approaches that we have for publishing and communicating, well, we can just treat the screen like it's a piece of paper, right? And so now, with the rise of mobile, this is what is forcing society, forcing us as communicators, to acknowledge the ways that the web is different. And I want to be clear about this. The web has always been different. But now, with the rise of smartphone screens and now with even tablet devices, we are forced to give up this shared hallucination that we have been operating under, that we have any control at all over the size of someone's screen or the layout of that screen, the resolution of that screen, what input device someone is using to interact with that screen. All of that is gone. And so to me, this is the real transformation of mobile. When I talk about the challenges of content strategy for mobile, I don't mean how do you get your stuff onto a smartphone screen. What I mean is, how do we adjust as designers, as communicators, to working in a new world where we no longer have control? And so I want to be clear about this here. I'm not a futurist. I am not here to tell you what the next big thing is going to be. If I could do that, I would be very, very rich. But what I do want to tell you today is that whatever the next big thing is, it's going to be something. Humanity's drive for new devices, new platforms, new technology has not yet been sated. And so there will be some new platform that we have to figure out how to get our content onto. Maybe it's going to be smart TV. So there's a lot of hypothesizing that the living room is going to be the next great battle for consumer electronics. And device manufacturers and people are going to be trying to figure out how do you capture people's attention at this lean-back 10-foot view. And so to me, when I look at the smart TV form factor, to me this just really drives home the fallacy that we have any control, that we can plan for what size screen someone has or what sort of device they're using to interact with it. The sheer variety, the sheer scope of different platforms, different mechanisms, different ways that someone wants to interact, at a certain point, we just have to say, hey, maybe we can't treat this like a piece of paper anymore. Maybe we have to find some new way to embrace the inherent flexibility of the web. So maybe smart TV isn't the next interesting thing. Maybe what we should be talking about is in-car systems. So when I think about in-car systems, what I don't see is a touch screen that someone's going to be interacting with while they're driving the car. What I see is a combination of some input mechanisms, whether that's buttons or a screen, and an audio interface. And so when you think about the combination of what that means to communicate in ways that don't actually even involve a screen, that is this whole other new realm of figuring out how do we communicate, how do we get the essence of our content across, even when it doesn't have an actual physical interface. So I know audio interfaces right now, they're kind of seen as like not being quite ready for prime time. I mean, you go ask Siri a question and she starts like spitting back garbage. And so there's this sense of like, yeah, maybe audio interfaces aren't going to happen. You know what else sucked for decades? Touchscreens. Touchscreens were terrible. I mean, you remember you'd go to the ATM and you'd have to figure out how to like get your finger to angle just right to make the button push? For decades, touchscreens were seen as this also-ran technology that was never actually going to make it into popular use. And then one day, touchscreens worked. They worked perfectly. And it transformed our entire industry in the space of like 5 years. So I don't know when it's going to happen. 5 years, 15 years, 50 years. But I do know one thing, that one day, the Star Trek computer is going to be a reality. And the last thing that I want when I go and ask the Star Trek computer a question is for it to start spitting back http:// at me. The idea that we need to separate our content, the meaning of our content, from how it is actually marked up and expressed in code or styling, that is at the heart of what it means to publish across platforms. I sometimes have designers ask me, like, Karen, why should we bother trying to parse out what is the difference between italics and emphasis when every major browser since the dawn of time has rendered emphasis as italics? Not in an audio interface, they don't. One of those things conveys visual styling. The other conveys semantic meaning. In an audio interface, emphasis would be rendered by tone of voice. And so when you start peeling back, I mean, if that's the level of problem that we have at the tiniest little HTML tag, to separate out, to parse out what is what something looks like and what is what something means, you realize that the work that we do today to try to solve these problems is the work that is going to help us get our content onto platforms in the future. And frankly, I hope it also makes clear that the work that we do today to separate content from presentation is also the right thing to do for accessibility. So if you're interested in this, just go check out what Google is doing with what they call their conversation group. Okay? So Google is a company that can make cars that drive themselves. And that's not even their core business. That's just some like weird side project somebody dreamed up. No. For Google, the way that human beings interact with technology through language, that is at the heart and soul of what they do. And they are investing really heavily in figuring out how to make audio interfaces work. So if that's the case, why, maybe the next big thing is going to be Google Glass. I don't really think Google Glass is the next big thing. I think Google Glass is like the Segway of mobile. It's like a Segway, but for your face. So Google Glass may not be the next big thing that we have to publish to, but I guarantee that wearable devices will be a technology that people will have to get their content onto. I worked this past year with a large catalog publisher, and what they publish is this giant print catalog filled with industrial products. That it's designed for people who work on the factory floor to buy products that they need to run their machines. And so I had a conversation with them where I'm like, look, I don't know when the day will come when you will stop publishing this print catalog. I'm not here to say it's going to be 5 years or 10 years or 15 years from now. But I think everybody in this room can agree that one day, the day will come where the world will no longer need your 2-inch thick binder of different products. You're going to stop publishing that print catalog. And when that day comes, what happens if the most likely form factor for your audience, these people who work in industrial settings, who work in factories and warehouses, what if the most likely place that they want your content is on a wearable heads-up device? Will your publishing processes, will your teams, will your content be ready to be published onto a device like this? If you don't start planning now for what it's going to take to make that happen, it is likely that you will not be ready, that your content will be so inextricably locked to the print publishing workflow that your ability to actually get it out in a meaningful format and get it onto another platform may take you years to get there. So the time to start thinking about that is right now. So Google Glass, okay, maybe not the next big thing. Maybe the next big thing is going to be watches, right? Everybody's talking about watches. There's Galaxy Gear, there's the Pebble. Stay tuned for a couple days from now when Apple is very likely to release a wrist-mounted display, a wrist-mounted device. So, you know, I think people are kind of like skeevish on watches, right? A lot of people are just like, why do I want to watch? Why do I want to read? Do you want to read a document on my watch? That doesn't make any sense. But when you think about a watch as a device that exists in a larger ecosystem of devices, so perhaps it is the controller for a smart TV. Perhaps it shows notifications from your desktop or your smartphone. Perhaps it is a touchscreen controller that allows you to interact with an audio interface. When you start seeing a larger ecosystem of devices that work together, you realize that the content that we produce, even if it doesn't have to be actually read on the device, still needs to be represented and navigable, browsable, accessible from a variety of different device types, screen sizes, other forms of interaction. But I know, watches, so tiny, right? Probably not the next big thing. Maybe the next big thing is going to be stadium scoreboards. Yes, come on, everybody. Let's get our content where everybody can see it. This is a joke. I put this in here as a joke. I thought it was funny because it was like watches are so tiny and the scoreboards are so big. And then I turned around and I talked to a client who said that the biggest problem that they are facing today is digital signage. It's a university client. And this university has a desktop website, they have a mobile app, and they just purchased all these digital signs that they want to put up all over campus. And so they came to me and they said, Karen, we have these 3 different form factors, and what we want to do is automatically be able to manage our content and maintain it in one place, and then automatically publish that content to the web, to the app, and to the signs. 3 very different form factors. And I was like, hey, have you thought about treating the signs as if they're just like a completely separate silo and just managing that like it's its own little one-off workflow? And they were like, Karen, ain't nobody got time for that. No, that's why we're talking to you. We want a way that we can maintain one central repository of our content and send things like campus alerts or events listings or information for students and have it appear in a way that is appropriate and meaningful on these 3 very different form factors. This isn't some crazy futuristic dystopia that these people are living in. This is a real problem that they're trying to solve right now, today. So if large organizations, large enterprises are faced with the challenge of how do they publish to digital signage, maybe you too will be facing the same problem in your homes with the advent of the internet refrigerator, right? Can't talk about the future without talking about the internet refrigerator. It's like the biggest problem facing our society today is that I can't check Twitter in the 30 seconds that it takes me to get a Diet Coke. Again, I don't really think the internet refrigerator is going to be the next big thing, but you know, the idea that our homes will have a variety of sensors and devices and screens embedded in them, that's reality. I mean, maybe it's not the internet fridge. Maybe your entire cooktop will have, the glass of your cooktop will have an iPad screen embedded in it. And you can use the touch screen capabilities to navigate through recipes or videos or news while you're cooking. Or, and I do think that this is the biggest problem facing our society today, what happens when toaster printers become a reality? Is your content ready to be burned onto delicious toast? And I'm excited, I'm really, in fact, excited to announce this to you today. My friends, toaster printers are a reality. You can now burn your selfie into delicious toast. So these are the problems that I think humanity has come together to solve. So right now, today, the organizations that we work with are already faced with the challenge of how to get their content onto all of these different platforms and screen sizes and form factors. So they've already got a website. They're wrestling with how do they get their content onto the mobile web or mobile apps. They have email. They have blogs. They have social channels. Heck, some organizations are using this as the inflection point to say, how do we figure out how to streamline and integrate our print production processes with our digital production processes? And this is what they're already facing today. Tomorrow, there will be ever more platforms, ever more screen sizes, ever more places that we have to get our content onto. It is a veritable zombie apocalypse of new devices and platforms and screen sizes, and they just keep coming every day. How are we going to battle them? How are we going to protect ourselves from the zombies? The answer to how we battle the zombies does not come from the same techniques that we have used for print. It does not assume that we will have art directors and designers and editors and developers to battle every platform. Instead, we need to think more systemically about our communication and design practices so that we can effectively survive the zombie apocalypse. And to me, the root of how we solve that problem, and get down to the very essence of it, it comes from achieving what I call the true separation of content from form. It means assuming that we no longer can rely on the techniques that we have to communicate what something looks like to stand in for what that means. And when you take a step back and realize just how transformational that is in the history of human communication, just how different the web is from the way that we communicate in print. I mean, the idea that you would go to this medieval monk who is laboriously hand-scribing documents and say, let's try to solve the problem of how we communicate the meaning of what's contained in this document separate from the actual physical form, separate from the particular design and layout choices that you are making in this document, the idea that you would pose that to him as a problem would not make any sense. I mean, for most of human history, there has been no way to separate what the document means from what it looks like. And yet, today on the web, with all of these different platforms and screen sizes and devices, that is the very problem that we are tasked with solving. When Dan Jacobson, so he's the API guy at Netflix, he's formerly from NPR, when he says that the future of content management systems, of publishing systems, is in their ability to capture the content in a clean, presentation-independent way, when I talk to the web community, I think it is very easy to reduce this to a problem with markup. To say, oh yes, let's get all of that cruft out of our content. Let's make sure that all of the styling information, all the formatting information isn't all baked in with the content. And it's true. I rail against this idea of having what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG rich text editors on the web. The idea that we give content authors, content creators, this giant blob in which they can dump anything they want. You know, it's like, oh yeah, sure, you can put a big table in there and add some custom bullets and take that table of contents box and make it purple and float it to the right. We tell content creators that they can treat the web as if it's just like Microsoft Word. This screen here even says, the Word-like interface makes content creation easy for business users who know nothing about HTML and want to keep it that way. The problem is, by allowing content creators to believe that the web is just like a Word document, we are forcing them to rely on tools from visual styling to communicate the actual meaning of the document. And so when you look at something like this and say, what happens when I want to take this page that is formatted only for the desktop web and have it render appropriately and meaningfully on any other platform? The only solution is to go in and strip out all of that formatting information. Strip that out, but there's meaning attached to that. The content creator, when they took that table of contents box and made it purple and floated it to the right, they weren't intending to communicate purple right. They were intending to communicate that information is an aside. It is something that is structured outside of the core of the document. And yet the tools that we have given them only allow them to convey what something should look like on one platform. We do not give them the ability to convey what something means. And so I complain about this a lot, right? I've actually kind of gotten the reputation of being like the president of the WYSIWYG Haters Club. And I gotta tell you guys, it's a lot of fun to come and talk to groups like this, but my graffiti crime spree is also going exceptionally well. I mean, this really allows me to get the message out to a much broader audience. So, I complain about rich text editors and WYSIWYG formatting on the web so much that people sometimes come up to me and it's like they assume that I'm some kind of Markdown evangelist. They're like, yes, Markdown! And the problem's not the toolbar, okay? The problem isn't the idea that somebody has something on their screen that allows them to convey what something is. The problem with this is that we are using an antiquated mental model, an antiquated metaphor from the desktop publishing era 40 years ago to communicate to people what it means to publish on the web. Y'all know where WYSIWYG came from? It came from Xerox. It came from Xerox PARC, their research group, because they invented the laser printer. Think about that for a minute. Up until this point, a Xerox machine could only make a copy of a document that already existed. Xerox invented a way that you could print out whatever you wanted. But they needed a way for you to actually create that document. And so Xerox invented the entire concept of what you see is what you get, the entire concept of the graphical user interface, so that they could sell laser printers. And so as a result, I would argue that the laser printer is the most important component of the desktop publishing revolution. The demand for laser printers. People went out and bought Apple computers. They went out and bought laser printers so they could make these terribly formatted newsletters that had 1 billion fonts in them. But that drive is what drove personal computer adoption and led directly to the growth of the web. I feel comfortable saying I wouldn't have a job. I think probably most of you wouldn't have a job today if it weren't for the personal computer revolution and the demand for laser printers. And so it's like I say this with a great deal of respect when I feel like I have to remind everybody that the web is not a laser printer. The web has nothing in common with a laser printer. The web has basically, there are no characteristics of publishing on the web that have anything to do with how a document format on your screen in a Word document or an InDesign document translates to what comes out of the laser printer next to your desk. Ted Nelson says that imitating paper on a computer screen is like tearing the wings off a 747 and using it as a bus on the highway. The web can do more than print. The capabilities of the web, the ability to have content be accessible globally, to have content be targeted to different platforms or to different people, with the ability of the web to be a truly dynamic publishing medium. All of those capabilities are being held back because of our reliance on tools and metaphors and mental models that are all derived solely from print. This is why I say we are fighting a war, people. A war between blobs and chunks. Blobs are these big, formatting, rich, messy, presentation-dependent clumps of content and styling information that really work well on only one platform. Chunks are clean, presentation-independent, well-structured, well-formatted bits of content that have been created with the intention that that content can and will live everywhere. This is a war, people. We cannot let the blobs win. So let's talk about what it means to survive the zombie apocalypse. What I think it gets at, the core of it, is that we need to move away from what I call container-first thinking. Okay? And this is so much at the heart of how we think about what we publish, right? Like, you open up Photoshop, and what's the first thing you see? Why, it asks you how big of a canvas you want. I mean, we're thinking right from the start about what are the boundaries of this thing that we're making, as opposed to what is the thing. My friend and colleague Ethan Marcotte, when he describes how they did the landmark responsive Boston Globe redesign, he says, oh, well, we first started out by identifying common breakpoints. We said, well, here are the containers that we want to put our thing into. To his credit, the web has moved beyond this, and he will remind you, do not do this. Or lately, we've been told that cards are the future of the web. Cards. They're like pages, but tiny. So these challenges, I mean, I can understand, I'm very sympathetic to people as a designer, that they need to move beyond having just a box around which they put their content. But these problems, they go well beyond just the way that designers work. They go into the very foundation of how we think about our systems and our tools. I do a lot of work with organizations on their content and their publishing processes, and so I get to see a lot of companies' content management underpants. And, when you go in and you dig around in the bowels of their system, I will see something like this and be like, here's the list of content types that they think they publish. And I'm like, some of these things are not like the others. See, they have the things that they publish. We publish articles, we publish FAQs, we publish press releases. But they also have what those things should look like. And those are treated, carousels or wrappers or accordions or pages, those are treated as if they are the same thing in the content management system. What something is and what something looks like are inextricably intertwined at the very center of the system. And so let me talk to you a little bit about how we unpack this by giving you an example of the most container-first thinking that we have on the web, the blobbiest blob that we have ever blobbed onto the web. Oh yes, the PDF. Sorry, Adobe. So I want to tell you one thing. I want to start this off real clearly. Nobody is reading your PDF. Nobody. The World Bank recently did an analysis of all of the PDFs that they have published between 2008 and 2012. And what they found was that 33%, a third of them, were never downloaded at all. And beyond that, another 40% were downloaded fewer than 100 times. And surely some of that was like, thanks, Mom. So for the World Bank, valuable information, meaningful communication, things that they had invested heavily in and wanted to have published on the web, simply was never read. And the question is why? Why are organizations like this dependent on it? So I recently worked with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. And they, too, are like a veritable PDF farm. I mean, they're like harvesting and growing and planting all of these PDFs. And so when you look at the type of PDFs that they produce, obviously deeply rooted in print mental models, the challenge there is that they have a variety of different content types. They have charts and graphs and tables and equations and other forms that need to be embedded in this longer-running document. And yet, they do not have the tools that they need to communicate this. And so I asked myself, it's like, why are these places these PDF factories? I mean, when you look at PDFs and you say, well, they're not really inherently digital, right? I mean, at the core of what we publish, these things aren't actually true digital communications. They're not really responsive. I mean, if you want to have this document appear on a different device or screen size, it's not going to render well. They're not searchable. I mean, there's things you can do to make your PDFs more searchable, but let's face it, the fact that nobody's reading or downloading these PDFs suggests that nobody's finding these PDFs. And even worse, they're not accessible. Again, there's things you can do to make your PDFs accessible, but let's face it, this document is not inherently accessible to people who are coming in, needing different screen readers or whatnot, in the way that true digital text is. So why do they keep doing it? Well, it's because it allows them to work with a familiar tool. For a banker, for a researcher, to be able to open up Microsoft Word and produce this document and then have it published to the web without having to know any special technology or wrestle with a content management system, that makes it worth it for them. It means that they have a simple workflow, that they can use a familiar tool, save it to a PDF, send that document to somebody and have them post it on the web. For someone to replicate one of these complex research reports using a content management system is likely to take 3 or 4 or 5 different people to produce the text, to produce the graphics, to produce the images, and have them all render as truly digital content. And so what that means is that for charts and tables and graphs, we don't have a good way to handle that on the web right now. We are forced to rely on tools that are, that we've perfected over all of our years of working with print. And so what that means is that for documents, much like the PDF that I showed here, that have a long-running narrative flow, that need different content types embedded within them, for organizations that need to support that kind of unstructured text, it is very difficult to do that with the kind of tools that we have on the web today. My friend Jeff Eaton wrote an article for A List Apart called The Battle for the Body Field. And I highly recommend reading this. I think it's a great analysis of the challenges that designers and developers and content authors face when trying to figure out how to handle truly unstructured text in a structured format on the web. And what Jeff says is that while standard HTML is rich enough for a designer to represent complex content, it isn't precise enough to describe and store that content in a presentation-independent format. And so what that means is that the tools that we have to communicate on the web are simply not rich enough for us to get to the level of granularity that we need to store our content in a meaningful format. And there is a huge cost associated with this. So I spoke to an organization, a large professional services firm, that also, huge PDF factory. And they shared a little bit of data with me about their big recent web redesign. They said they had a whole big mess of PDFs. And so their job was to say, how can we go through our big pile of PDFs and pull out the useful content that's meaningful and have it be published in a truly digital format? So they said, we had about 6,250 PDFs that we looked at and said, let's make this accessible on the web. So how did they do that? Well, they started out by doing a process that I call content modeling. And what that means is that they have somebody like me, have an architect come in, and go through and kind of research and diagnose what is the structure of the content in this big unmodeled blob? What are the things that are in there? So that process took them 3 weeks, took them 4 people to do it. They paid those people $175 an hour, so that process took $84,000. After that, then they went on and they did what they called a pilot project. So they took the content model that they had derived for that PDF, and they went and tested it on a bunch of new PDFs that they hadn't modeled. And the goal there was to make sure that the model was appropriate and encompassed all of the things that they would see. So they spent a week doing that, the same 4 people, cost them $28,000. Then, once they felt that the model was stable, they went through the process of actually copying and pasting that text. That took them 5 months to do. Lower paid people, but it still cost $200,000. And so the sum total for them to get the valuable content out of these PDFs, 6 months, over $300,000. $300,000 to get the valuable, meaningful information back out of those PDFs. In contrast, they said they had some PDFs that they didn't want a model. They wanted to make them available. They're like, yeah, okay, we've got them, let's keep them. 25,000 PDFs that they said, let's just keep them in PDF format, and we'll just migrate them over to the new system. To achieve this, they did a process that I call shoveling. It took 1 week, it took one developer, cost him $2,800. And so I hope that you can see here that the challenge that we face is that once content gets locked up into a particular output format, that is where it goes to die. They now have a giant garbage dumpster full of PDFs that they will never be able to get the content back out of because it is attached too clearly to that one particular output format. Let me leave you with this. Our future, our success on the web, depends on us being able to escape from the blobs. Our future on the web means having content that, starting today, right now, has the structure and the underlying meaning attached to it so that it is not completely locked up to one particular output format, so that it is not completely reliant on the styling information attached to any one platform to communicate what it means. Our future depends on having structured content. So moving beyond blob-based, WYSIWYG-based formatting, moving beyond the tools that we have derived from print to communicate what we mean, and instead coming up with new tools, new philosophies, new mental models that allow content creators and designers and developers to accurately and completely communicate what that content means. Our future depends on fighting off the zombies. Because whatever new device or platform or screen size or resolution comes next, and I guarantee you, it's going to be something. Somebody out there is going to want to get their content onto it. And so the opportunity today is to move beyond thinking, I'm going to intend my content to live on one platform. I'm going to treat any one platform as if it's the real place where my content is supposed to be consumed. And instead, embrace the inherent, flexible, fluid nature of the web. That's what I have for you today. Thank you.